everyone, and welcome to a new edition of HedgePoint's updates on the Black Sea region. I'm Chris Trant, the head of U.S. Agriculture, and we have a lot to talk about today. We're going to cover three topics today: the events since the collapse of the grain deal. Number two, the state of the union of Black Sea grain supply and demand. And then to wrap up, we're going to cover some upcoming market influencing events. I want to note that today's filming is August the 9th, with the market being as volatile and the headlines equally so. It's important to note that the events we're going to cover today cover up into August the 9th. So let's get started. The Black Sea region has had 4 points of conflict in the past few weeks. The Odessa port region, the Danube ports, the Crimean Bridge, and the Russian Black Sea ports. The most notable headline, of course, was the collapse of the grain corridor. The grain corridor was a UN-backed initiative to ship Ukrainian agriculture products out of Odessa into the global market. Since inception, almost 33 million metric tons of grain have shipped via this corridor. About 50% of that's been corn, and about 25% has been wheat. Now, to cover the timeline of events that occurred, starting with the collapse of the grain deal. On July 17th, Russia announced a unilateral withdrawal from the grain corridor, citing continued sanctions on the global SWIFT. They had done 2 previous extensions since the grain deal started last summer, and on July 17th, they said no more. That same day, there were explosions reported on the Crimean Bridge, a Russian bridge that Ukraine was suspected to have attacked. The following day, July 18th, Russia began to attack Ukrainian grain and port infrastructure, particularly in the former safe ports of Odessa. 60,000 metric tons of grain were destroyed in these strikes. On July 19th, Russia announced that any inbound vessels for Ukraine were considered legitimate military targets. On July 24th, Russia struck the Danube River port of Reni. This was a milestone because previously Russia had not attacked the Danube River, and the Danube River was seen as Ukraine's second port area after Odessa. On August 2nd, Russia attacked the Danube River port of Ishmael. 40,000 metric tons of grain were destroyed. In retaliation, on August the 4th, a Ukrainian seaborne drone damaged a Russian warship near a critical Russian port that handles energy and agricultural exports. Ukraine also that same day declared that 6 Russian ports were to be considered within military zones. Perhaps the biggest recent headline, on August 5th, a Ukrainian seaborne drone struck a Russian fuel tanker called the SIG. A precedent was set that the Black Sea region now is a war zone. And the market has been trading volatile ever since. Now, to look at some of the physical damage done over these past 3 weeks, 4 Ukrainian ports have been struck. 220,000 metric tons of physical grain have been destroyed. Storage facilities, port loading facilities, all damaged. Ukraine has responded by attacking 2 Russian ships in the Black Sea. One, a military ship, and the other, a commercial ship carrying military-grade fuel. Both sides are vowing retaliation to the other, and the risk of escalation remains very real. To cover the state of the union of Black Sea grain supply and demand, we'll start with Ukraine. Ukraine was already witnessing a slight slowdown in their exports this summer. Ukraine was shipping about 2 million metric tons of corn and 1 million metric ton of wheat. What's important to note, though, is the summer is not traditionally Ukraine's large export season. Their main export season for wheat is actually August through October, where they ship closer to 4 million metric tons per month. For corn, they actually will start shipping in October through February, reaching 5 million metric tons per month. The main countries impacted by this disruption in the Black Sea from Ukraine: China, the European Union, Bangladesh, the Middle East, and North Africa. The grain corridor was responsible for about 50% of Ukraine's total exports. The remaining 50% were split between the Danube River ports and overland to rail and truck to the European Union. The Danube River ports actually have had a large amount of investment in their own export capacity. Before the war, the Danube River ports only did about 2% of Ukraine's total agricultural exports. Today, it's closer to 25%. Now, the EU is an outlet for Ukrainian grain that is somewhat controversial. Since the war started, the European Union allowed Ukraine to export unprecedented volumes of corn, wheat, and barley into the EU. And this has consequences, which we'll talk later on. What's critical about the Danube River, which is Ukraine's only remaining functional grain ports, granted there have been airstrikes on them recently. With the Danube, Ukraine could, in theory, match their exports that they are projected to have. If they have max capacity in the Danube and increased capacity to the EU, Ukraine, in theory, could still meet their export expectations. However, without the Danube River, if the Danube River ports cannot be secure, and if strikes continue, they cannot export nearly enough grain versus their expectations. At the current market share of transportation, meaning that without the Danube, they can only ship to the EU via truck and rail. At most, they can export a little less than 20 million metric tons, half of their expectations. That would result in corn exports from Ukraine decreasing by nearly 75%, and wheat exports from Ukraine decreasing nearly 85%. And what's critical to note is Ukraine represents about 10% of the world total corn exports and about 5% of the total wheat exports. If the Danube River is to stay on, the air defenses around the Danube must improve to provide security for not only the ports, but also for the inbound ships. Now, turning to Russia. Russia has been blessed with record harvests and record production, and that is translated into the export market. Russia has exported a record amount of wheat, both in terms of absolute numbers and seasonally. Russian ports, up until recently, have been operating essentially under peacetime conditions. That is changing. In fact, the port where a recent Ukrainian strike happened represents 2% of the total crude oil exports of the world and large amounts of wheat as well. The main destinations of this Russian wheat are the Middle East and North Africa, countries with high populations and a low amount of arable land, representing a critical lifeline for these countries that, with Ukraine being shut off, leaves Russia as the supplier of choice for the time being. Another word on Russian wheat exports. Russia has plenty of motivation and capacity to take any lost market share away from Ukraine. As I mentioned, Russia had a record wheat harvest. They have large amounts of available stocks ready to go, and they've had severe currency devaluation, making the ruble increasingly cheaper and therefore making their exports more attractive to the world markets. In fact, Russia has actually taken many of Ukraine's traditional wheat clients. Egypt, the world's largest importer of wheat, before the war, basically split their imports 50-50 between Ukraine and Russia. Some years, Ukraine was actually a larger share than Russia. Since the war began, and particularly since the grain corridor collapsed, Ukraine has been absent from Egypt's markets. Russia has gladly taken a customer away from Ukraine to ship their massive crop and to deprive the Ukrainian government of critical revenue in a wartime environment. For the conclusion, upcoming market influence events. The market has been very volatile with commodities these past few weeks. And as the world awaits for more headlines, there's some things that we have to keep in mind on the political and economic scale that might cause more volatility in the market. The first is Ukraine's crop calendar itself. Ukraine actually has 3 events that are going on now or shortly that will be critical for the available supply for export. One is an ongoing wheat harvest. Ukraine is currently in the middle of their wheat harvest cycle. They've actually harvested about 60% of their wheat crop. Their corn harvest will begin next month in September. Now, for both of these crops, the weather conditions in Ukraine have been quite favorable. The crops have grown in size. The corn crop is estimated to be 3 million metric tons higher than the month of May, and the wheat crop improved by 1 million metric tons in the month of May. As these larger crops get harvested, they have to go somewhere, either via shipment to export or into storage. Storage is quite limited in Ukraine, and Ukraine depends on exports to clear their production. The Ukrainian domestic industry cannot absorb all the production Ukrainian farmers produce. Ukraine exports in a normal year about 60% of their wheat crop. They export 75% of their corn crop. Without an effective export program, this production, which is currently being harvested or will be harvested, will likely sit in Ukrainian storage facilities and further incentivize Ukrainian farmers not to plant. The next planting cycle is actually in September on wheat. So Ukraine will finish their harvest of wheat this month. They will then begin wheat field sowing for their next crop. And farmers are making their decisions now on just how much wheat to plant. And what is a concerning situation for the Ukrainian farmer is they do not know if there will be an effective export channel for their future production, and if they have any capacity from their current crop to meet export demand. This all might translate into lower corn and lower wheat planting in Ukraine in the near future. It's also important to note, too, that in June, the Novokhovka Dam in Ukraine collapsed. And this dam reservoir actually fed critical parts of Ukraine's wheat areas, fueling concerns about irrigation going forward. Ukrainian farmers may well be pressured to plant less wheat acres next month, and that, of course, will have repercussions in global supply and demand. Now, onto the political side. Without the Odessa ports and with the Danube currently under attack, the only outlet for Ukrainian grain is overland into the European Union. And this has both logistical issues. The cost to ship via rail or truck is higher than shipping via boat, and political as well. 5 countries in the European Union currently have bans on Ukrainian grain imports. Hungary, Bulgaria, Poland, Romania, and Slovakia. In response to an unprecedented flood of Ukrainian grain entering their market in 2022 and earlier this year, announced that Ukrainian grain could not land in those 5 countries. The grain could ship through on their way somewhere else, but they could not sell it within those borders. There were election years in these countries, and the farmer electorate in these countries protested. There were trucks blocking roads. There were protests saying that farmers cannot compete with the flood of Ukrainian grain, and the politicians in these countries decided to protect their own domestic industries and ban Ukrainian grain. This ban will last until this coming September 15th, where the ban will either be renewed or it will be ended. Obviously, Ukraine is hoping that the ban is ended. So without the Danube River and without Odessa, they can only ship to the EU. And with 5 countries currently having domestic bans on their products, that increases the cost to ship their grain over these countries, and limits their market destinations for any source of relief from their current crops that are being harvested. For another possible scenario, which is further Black Sea military escalation. The ongoing Ukrainian counteroffensive is having a very high casualties and high stakes impact on both Russia and Ukraine. Military situations can impact politics, which then in turn impact economics as well. And all this uncertainty in the Black Sea, the port strikes, the ships being struck by Ukrainian drones, is increasing the insurance premiums for shipping vessels within the Black Sea. And in fact, there are over 100 ships in the Danube River waiting to load that are currently sitting because of the limited capacity in the Danube that are now potential targets, either intentionally or through collateral damage. I'd also add too that the Russian ruble is at lows for the year. Now, on one hand, this does make Russian exports quite attractive, quite cheaper in the global market. But it also begs the question too that the Russian economy might be in a situation that requires money from exports to meet their own military obligations and their military budget. And it remains to be seen on if Russia can stay stable enough to continue exporting wheat at the capacity that they have been. Most vessels in the Black Sea are owned either by Turkish or Greek companies. Both are NATO members. And the Ukrainian drone boats are relatively cheap. They're robots, essentially jet skis with dynamite. And Ukraine has used them twice against Russian ships in the past few weeks. And they have many more that they could use if escalation continues. Likewise, Russia continued to choose to escalate by continuing attacking Ukraine infrastructure or potentially hitting their capacity to export via the boats themselves. What's telling is JP Morgan at one point was actually processing the Russian grain payments. That processing has stopped, leaving Russia increasingly isolated to global commerce and global finance. All this, in my opinion, leads to a scenario where further Black Sea military escalation could very well have increasing impacts on global supply and demand of corn and wheat, and also might have impacts politically and militarily as well. I'll look into the future with countries outside of the Black Sea. China was the destination of a large amount of Ukrainian goods from the grain corridor. In fact, China imported 25% of their corn from Ukraine. In 2020, China went from a relatively quiet buyer of corn to one of the largest worldwide. They regularly import over 20 million metric tons since 2020. In part, this is because the Chinese hog herd is now larger than before African swine fever, meaning they have more pigs to feed and they need more food to feed them. And while China does grow a large amount of corn and wheat themselves, they have had recent floods thanks to the typhoon Dorsum, causing flood and damage in cities, rice, wheat, and corn areas in China that might cause China to seek more imports to meet their food obligations. And along that note, to bring this to a conclusion, China was the #1 destination of grain corridor shipments. More than Turkey, more than Spain, China was by far the largest recipient of Ukrainian grain that is now closed off. Also telling is on July 20th, India, the world's largest rice exporter, announced an abrupt ban on varieties of rice exports to ensure that India has enough rice to feed their own people. China is the largest importer of rice in the world, meaning that China has to balance the situation in Ukraine, the absence of one of their main corn providers, along with their own production issues thanks to this typhoon flooding, and the potential to have rice no longer be as available as it once was when China was importing. So that was a lot to talk about. I want to thank you all for joining us on this edition of the Black Sea Grain Corridor Update with HedgePoint. If you have any questions on risk management or anything on this presentation, I would encourage you to reach out to myself or anyone on our team. And we look forward to talking to you again soon, hopefully with more encouraging news. So thank you, everyone, and take care. Talk to you next time. Bye-bye.